for going up on the cross. We thank you for rising on the third day from the grave. But as you made that sacrifice for us, we come on this day to inform our community as to how we can do better in our health as well as life choices. We thank you and we praise you for Bishop Staples. We thank you and we praise you for Temple of Praise. Now may your Holy Spirit have his way. And we want to say thank you for how the people of God shall be empowered, informed, and blessed. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? We are so glad that you're able to come and to discuss this important matter concerning vaccines. We have been the type of church that we want to be involved in things that are going on in the community. Recently, we did something with the police after the death of George Floyd, and we got with the police officers, the chief of police in D.C. and PG County, and pastors were with me as well, and we discussed some things. We wanted to know what to do as far as being pulled over by the police and how to respond and things of that nature, because usually they'll tell you that somebody suspicious is in the neighborhood, and I want to know if the word suspicious was code for black. I wanted to understand what was going on. Now we're dealing with the vaccine, and there are a lot of people. Some of them can't get to it. Some of them can't get to the places. They don't know. Some of the older people don't know how to do the computer and get on. I get people to do that for me. I don't know how to do it either, but make the appointments and things of that nature. But then there are some that are afraid because of the history that we, as men and women of color, have dealt with in the past, and they're concerned about that. We want to have some questions and some answers. We're so thankful for the great physicians and the nurse of the year. God bless you with us today, and these wonderful pastors. So if there's anything else that we need to do, we can move on with who do we have next? Prophetess Webb is going to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Bishop. And good afternoon to our viewing audience. And I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing our panel. I'll go from my left on around. And of course, our esteemed host today, my bishop, Bishop Glenn A. Staples, and the presiding prelate of the Temple of Praise International Fellowship of Churches. And then next to him, our beloved Dr. Jahan El Bayume, and so we affectionately call her Dr. Gigi. She is the founding director of the Rodham Institute, as well as a professor of medicine at George Washington University. And she is also a physician to presidential families, so we thank God for her. Sitting next to her, he represents a legacy of serving our community in the church arena. Dr. Joel Peoples, our beloved Dr. Joel Peoples from the City of Praise Family Ministries, and we thank God for him today. Sitting next to him is Dr. Yolanda Lewis Ragland. She is a board-certified pediatrician and weight loss physician here in Southeast Washington. She serves the community, and we thank God for her consenting to join us today. Next to her, we're excited. We have some out-of-town guests. We have Dr. Wayne Powell, and we're glad to have him here today. He's part of our Fellowship of Churches, and we thank God for him. Sitting next to him, we have the renowned Dr. Robinson. Dr. Reginald Robinson is the president on the entire eastern border of the American Heart Association. He's a cardiologist, and so we thank God for him and consenting to be with us here today, as well as a physician at MedStar Washington Hospital Center. Sitting next to him, we have our esteemed Dr. Calvin Cage. Amen. He's a friend to our bishop. He's a friend to the ministry. He's pastoring the Meridian Hill Baptist Church. We thank God for him and his church. Amen. We thank God for him consenting. Sitting next to him, we have the esteemed Dr. Yolanda Hancock, affectionately known as Dr. Yolo. We thank God for her. Amen. A board certified physician, pediatrician as well, doing tremendous work in the community. Sitting next to her, we have Miss Meady Bottomneal. She is also an esteemed panelist. She is a presidential elector. She was one of the ones on the Electoral College to choose the president. She is also the head of the DC Nursing Board Association, and she was recently chosen to be the Nurse of the Year. Amen. So let's give her some congrats on that. Amen. Sitting next to her, we have our esteemed second vice, amen, of Temple of Praise International Fellowship of Churches, Dr. Vincent Charity, and we thank God for him consenting to be with us today. And lastly, our esteemed panelist, the Reverend Dr. Granger Browning. I always still say Bishop, amen, but we know that he is the pastor of an AME church that we all know, and he has been doing tremendous work in the community as well for years. And so we welcome you today. Sit in your seat of expectation. We want you to do a little housekeeping, invite some people now, share on your page, and if you have any questions, put it in the comment box, and we promise we'll try to get your questions addressed by these renowned physicians and by these esteemed and renowned pastors, preachers, bishops. Thank you once again for joining us. Now, Dr. Gigi, we're going to turn it over to you to open us up and just momentarily talk to us about the facts and some of the stats of COVID-19, because I know you can just spit them off your head of what's going on in DC.
Yes. Well, COVID-19 hit the planet with a vengeance. It's been over a year, and it's really hit African American communities, communities of color, extremely hard. In Washington, D.C., 84% of the deaths have happened among African American communities. That puts us at about 7th in the country per capita of deaths in the African American community. So DC and the DC area has been hit hard. And people say, well, why is it really impacting blacks more than other people? Why is that? Well, you know, COVID is just the latest example of what I like to call the medical apartheid system. Because people always think that coming to see us as doctors, nurses, as the healthcare system is how you are healthy. Well, that actually only accounts for about 20% of your overall health. 80% has to do with where you're born, how educated you are, what the economic health of the neighborhood where you live, the food that you eat, the air that you breathe, the water that you drink. I could go on and on. These are called the structural and social determinants of health. So guess what? If you live in Georgetown, one of the richest parts of DC, which by the way has the oldest black church in the city, you can expect to live on average 94 years. But if you live around here, Anacostia area, you can expect to live 66 years. Can you imagine that? That's almost 27 years, right, of a gap in a 10-mile span of a city, which is the capital of the richest country in the world. So, you know, Pastor and Bishop, you had alluded to sort of the history. Well, it's not just the history, it's the ongoing structural racist system that exists. You know, I went to Michigan for medical school, and Dr. Susan Moore, who some of you may have seen her video, she was a graduate physician from 2003. She chronicled the horrible care that she got at the hospital. She had COVID. She was begging for her life. I can't breathe, I'm in pain, please treat me. She died. So it's not just what's happened in the past, it's what's happening right now. And I think that when we're talking about COVID and the devastation that it's had, I was talking to some of my colleagues before we went on air. COVID is no joke. COVID, of course, people die and have died of COVID, but also COVID can cause disability. And we're going to hear from some of our other colleagues shortly about exactly how it affects the heart, what it can do for the brain, and blood clots and all of that. But we are now in a position where there is an effective vaccine, and I'm so happy and thankful, Bishop, that you have invited us today so we can have this conversation. So you can tell I can talk a lot, but we've got such esteemed panelists here, I think I'll stop there.
Okay, so what we would like to do then, Dr. Gigi, as the pastors, the esteemed faith-based leaders are here, they want to hear from the physicians. Talk to us about the vaccines, the various choices, the pros, the cons, and as you said, even with what it can do to our heart and to our brain, and Dr. Ragland and Dr. Hancock, even with children.
Yes.
Because we're finding that COVID now is affecting children and, the lasting effects. And so begin to talk to us about that as you're led,
Sure.
as you lead them, and then we're going to leave space for our faith-based leaders to then respond and ask you questions that
Sure.
they can answer appropriately with their parishioners.
So what I'd like to do is first talk about the experiences that our panelists, our clinician panelists, nurses and doctors have had with COVID, both personally and professionally. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about the vaccine. So Ms. Meady, why don't we start with you? Can you talk to us about your personal and professional experience with COVID?
Thank you so much, Dr. Gigi, and thank you again, Bishop, for allowing us to be here. And I would definitely be remiss as a church girl. I was sharing here on the panel with some of our ministers and pastors. I also bring greetings from New Bethel Baptist Church, where my pastor is Dexter Nuttall. And I serve in leadership there. But as a nurse, it's so important to realize that nurses have burnout, nurses are tired, healthcare professionals are exhausted. I need the community to know that although, yes, there is a vaccine on the horizon that is here, yes, the tides have turned prayerfully and it will sustain its way where we have mitigated the virus, and hopefully we see less infections, and hopefully the variants will continue to not multiply as they have been already. But personally, I'm tired. I was working for about 14, 15 weeks straight, every single day, going into the hospital, literally every single day, even on Sundays, pastors. And so it was very tiring. And then I dodged a bullet, if you will, for probably up until January. On December 23rd, I received my first dose of the vaccine. And then unfortunately, I did get COVID, and I was diagnosed on January 4th. And I used this platform, and I'm actually glad that he's here. This is now the second time it's happened, and I know he will speak shortly, so I just want to let everybody know he has permission to share. But I had developed hypertension post-COVID. I'm a healthy person. I actually was actively training to run the Chicago Marathon last year. Clearly, it didn't happen. And then after my COVID diagnosis, I just felt something just wasn't quite right. I know my body. I work out pretty much almost every day. And my dear friend, Dr. Robinson, I took my blood pressure, and I realized, okay, this is really high. So here's a caveat. When you know nurses and doctors and they're your friends, you start texting each other stuff all the time. And so I was like, Reggie, like, this is real. Like, I'm not a hypochondriac. I promise you, like, my blood pressure has been high. He was like, okay, Meady, just make an appointment. So I did. And unfortunately, because of COVID, I want the people to know that are watching and listening, please do not negate your health. Even if you have recuperated from COVID, please make sure you are making that appointment, that you're following up your physician or your PA or your NP or whoever it is in your healthcare system, and make sure you're getting that basic set of labs. Make sure they're there to check you out, because there is a thing, Dr. Gigi, as you know, that's called post-COVID syndrome now. And I can honestly say, even as a nurse, I'm healthy. I'm doing better now. I am on medications under his direction. However, I'm hoping that it's just temporary. I had to quarantine and be away from my husband and my 14-year-old son for 9 days. On January 6th, and we all know that was the insurrection. I was at a hotel downtown DC when all of this stuff was happening. So in addition to recuperating from COVID, I am a nursing leader. I have a team of about 60 to 70 individuals that I'm still kind of managing, if you will, from a hotel room, and that I'm not feeling good myself. And so fortunately, by the grace of God, the ability of me having that first dose of the vaccine mitigated any of my other potential reactions to COVID that I could have had, and I have recovered, but I'm now dealing dealing with the blood pressure issue, and I will let Dr. Robinson speak to that. But I think it's just so important for us to know that COVID is real. It is still here. It has not completely gone away. We all have on our mask. We're still making sure that, yes, get the vaccine. Make sure you follow with your physicians. And at the end of the day, yes, there's faith over fear. There's Christ over COVID, right? There's peace over this pandemic, but you have to be responsible for your health. No one else can do that for you but you. And I just want to encourage everyone to make sure, even if you didn't have COVID, it's now been a year. So if you haven't seen any of these wonderful physicians or your physician or your healthcare provider, get that checkup. Prostate cancer is still there. Hypertension is still there. Diabetes is still there. I had a close friend diagnosed with breast cancer in March of last year during the pandemic. And so other social determinants of health that you discussed is still here that is impacting our Black and brown community.
Thank you for sharing that, because your last point, I think, is crucial. We're so focused, Bishop, on COVID, that we forget that all the other illnesses are going on. So it's crucial that people go to their clinician, make sure that their diabetes and high blood pressure is controlled, because guess what? If they're not controlled, that puts you at higher risk for dying or having a disability from COVID. So Dr. Robinson, as Ms. Meady's physician, cardiologist, can you tell us this business of her blood pressure, she never had a problem, and then all of a sudden after COVID, is that something that you're seeing? And what are some of the other effects of the heart and blood pressure that you're seeing with COVID?
First, I want to thank you for having me. And when I look on the stage, I think of a book by Dr. Levi Watkins, who's an African-American cardiac surgeon in Baltimore who helped to pioneer the defibrillator. He wrote a book, You Don't Live on My Block. And what that meant was, if you don't understand where I'm coming from, how can you explain something to me, even as a physician? And just looking at us, I think that's a powerful statement, that when people see the information coming from someone that looks like them, you have a little bit more palatability in believing it. There's a campaign called Don't Die of Doubt by the American Heart Association. We've seen a 20 to 30% reduction in heart attacks and strokes coming into the emergency room. They didn't just go away. They've still been the leading cause of death in this country, heart attacks and strokes. And we think about the acronym for stroke, FAST. F, face drooping, A, arm weakness, S, slurred speech, and T is the most important part, time. So if you're fearful of going into the hospital when you have these classic symptoms, you can't get treatment if you go the next day or stay at home, or someone finds you home dead of a heart attack. I can't tell you how many people have said, I'm not going to the emergency room, I'm scared of COVID. I'm saying, you should be more scared of dying of a heart attack in your home alone. And listening to the symptoms, listening to your body, making sure you go in. There are a host of cardiovascular causes and complications post-COVID. Hypertension, I'm starting to see, I'm doing my own independent analysis, but I have seen more people come in with blood pressure spikes and elevations after COVID. There is an incidence or an increased risk of developing clots in the vessels from head to toe, getting what's called DVTs, or clots in the legs, clots in the lungs, stroke risk, the effects of inflammation from the virus. Just like you get the flu virus, you can get inflammation of the heart. But COVID has this thing where it's causing intense inflammation in the heart, the brain. So there are people coming in with chronic headaches, memory loss, chest pain. And one of the worst things you can find from a virus attack on the heart is congestive heart failure, where it causes this intense inflammation of the heart and causes the heart to become weak. Symptoms that you might see: worsening shortness of breath. You can't lay down flat at night because now your lungs are filled with fluid. You see swelling in your legs. You can't do your day-to-day activities because you're getting more short of breath. So pay attention to your body. That's the most important thing. Post-COVID, they're developing now processes how you follow young athletes post-COVID. And that's an issue where, oh, I'm young, I won't have to worry about it because they keep telling me on TV, if I'm young, nothing's going to happen to me if I get COVID. But there is a whole host of complication of the long hauler syndrome that we see post-COVID. There are young people that barely can walk now, trained athletes. If you look at Brian Gumbel in Real Sports, he did an episode on that, and how trained, highly functioning athletes have had complications down the line. So making you young doesn't make you invincible.
We've got two pediatricians with us. I think we'll start with you, Dr. Lewis Reckland, because we've been pretty lucky thus far that the virus has not impacted children as much as it has adults. Of course, any child dying is horrible, but now we're hearing that the new variants, these new strains, are actually more deadly for with kids. So can you please speak about that?
Definitely. So first of all, thank you so much. One of the things that Dr. Robinson pointed out was that seeing physicians and healthcare professionals, to our colleague, Nurse of the Year, these healthcare professionals that look like us in our communities, working and really pushing for our communities to be healthy and survive. It does matter. The messenger is as important sometimes as the message. And so as a pediatrician, it's really important, and I have found it, especially with my practice, that it's when we're talking, let's just start briefly with this vaccine. You know, one of the things that pediatricians have always had to talk to parents about is vaccinations. And we do get pushback. And so it is something that we're definitely trained in. And so it is something that we've been finding that we have to be able, if they trust us, if you're a part of, their community and their family, if they know that you've vaccinated your own children, then that means something to them. Just like they know that we have taken the vaccine as health professionals. That means something to our community. And so that's very important. I just wanted to say that as a pediatrician. But one of the other things that was pointed out was in adults, we do see these multi-systems affected, but there's also something called MIS-C. It's a multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. So this is not just unique to adults. It's definitely happening in children, just like the young adults, the young athletes rather, that are that are previously healthy, our nurse that was previously healthy. These are the sequelae that we're finding in our children. And so we don't want parents paranoid, but we also don't want them to assume that our children are invincible, are not going to be affected. We definitely want you to be aware and diligent. And it's harder because you got to listen. You got to listen to your children. You got to understand and have that communication in those conversations, because we have to be their advocates as their parents and as their pediatricians, their physicians, their community leaders. We have to be advocates for our children. And oftentimes they just don't know what they don't know, right? And so it's very important for us to be champions for them. And then lastly, just about the heart. Very, very passionate about heart health and heart health awareness. And even before COVID came along, this was something that I've been championing in our community, because we're not talking enough about it, not just in our adults, but in our children. And so one of the statistics I was sharing is that, prior to COVID, heart disease was the #1 killer. COVID only took over because it was a pandemic, because it was killing us. But guess who it was killing more? It was killing those who had already these comorbidities and these susceptibilities. And one of them is heart disease. Well, 49% of African American women have heart disease by age 20. That means it is a pediatric disorder. It is definitely a health disparity pediatric disorder, because many of our pediatricians don't pay attention to hypertension in the majority race, because it's not something they are suffering with. But if it's 49% of our young women, then at 20, that means it's happening at 18, at 17, at 16. We have to be aware of that. So being a heart health champion and understanding and hearing this story, it's just so important for us to know, and for you all to know, that we are, as pediatricians of color, we are aware, and we are championing, and we are advocating for your children. And we're teaming with you, and we're just excited that we're here and able to share this information and be a source.
Thank you. Dr. Yolandra, I'm going to call on you. You're not only a pediatrician, but you actually have a master's in public health and I've had the pleasure of being on radio shows with you. So can I ask you to just kind of give us a simple mini lesson about what the COVID virus is and why get vaccinated? And also especially, there's a lot of confusion about these variants. You hear about South Africa, England, Brazil, there's some that are homegrown. Can you please enlighten us?
Sure. First, I just want to thank you guys for having me. I feel blessed that I'm here sharing this stage with such incredible people. In terms of the pandemic, really from a public health lens, at Johns Hopkins, where I got my MPH, we change lives millions at a time. And in the midst of this pandemic, I can see how COVID has changed lives millions at a time. And we have to really think about it in the way of a quadruple pandemic, right? So there's the infection that COVID-19 has caused. And we clearly, from what Dr. Gigi has mentioned, see the glaring disparities within COVID, but these disparities have existed since the inception of this country. Number two, the economic downturn as a result of the pandemic disproportionately impacts communities of color. Number three, in the midst of all this, the racial injustice that we have endured since we were stolen and brought over here underwent a microscope, right? Everyone got to see it, and now a couple more folks are a little bit more woke. And then the fourth is the mental health impact that we do not talk about related to COVID-19. You don't have to have acquired COVID-19 to have been impacted. We know that 33% of African Americans have lost a loved one or friend to COVID-19 compared to less than 10% of our white counterparts. And in the midst of that loss, we have lost the disconnection from being able to go into our houses of worship, our houses of prayer, to be able to just mourn with our family members because of COVID. Not to mention how our children are impacted by the disproportionality of this pandemic. And one of the challenges as a parent, as a community, is that we don't necessarily create space to have those conversations with our children. My maternal family, all of them had COVID within the same week. My grandmother at 90 was hospitalized because of COVID, and I will tell you, every single time my mother called me, my heart dropped. I couldn't breathe because I thought that was going to be the phone call to tell me that my grandmother had transitioned. And so that anxiety alone, the depression, all of that we carry as a people on our shoulders on top of what is called the allostatic load, the total amount of stress that we as Black people experience every single day by just waking up in this United States of America. What it ends up doing is it affects what we call our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The stress hormones in our body at baseline are elevated simply because of the life we live. And then when you add on top of that a pandemic that has impacted us in so many different ways, it's not surprising that we see the health outcomes. It's not that we're genetically inferior. If anything, we are the most resilient people on this planet, given what we have survived and thrived through. But when you add all of that up, you will see increased rates of hypertension, diabetes, and all of those things, not simply based on our personal choices, but the systems by which these choices are made. And especially for our children, even though COVID-19 has not impacted children in the way that it has adults, it's a misnomer. There were only 190 children who died of influenza in 2019. 270 children have died because of COVID-19. And over 85% of them were children of color. Black and brown children who have died from this pandemic. So when we start having conversations about bringing our babies back to school, there's a whole different conversation that needs to be had about Black and brown children. And in terms of these variants, it makes it even more important for us to get vaccinated. I will be the first to admit, I did not jump on board immediately. I was not an early adopter of the vaccine. My eyebrow was raised and I had to read some data and pray. And I literally prayed and I was like, God, I need you to reveal to me how I should proceed. Because I am from the Bible Belt and my family's like Jesus over vaccines. I was like, no, we're going to talk about that. And it was because of my risk-benefit ratio, right? I have to think about my race, my age, my career, and my health conditions, and what does the data show, right? I have to think about the risk to my mother. Every single time I see patients, every single time I go to a protest or a rally, I had to recognize that I was bringing risk back to my household. So what do I need to do individually to protect us collectively? And based on the data, the numbers that I saw, I had no doubt that this was I was going to roll up my sleeve and get my shot. It wasn't a matter of if, simply when. And because of these variants, the South African, the Brazilian, the UK, the 2 California variants, and now a New York one, it's clear that we have to stop the spread of COVID-19. The more a virus replicates, the more it mutates. And with certain mutations, that can affect how infectious COVID is, how much death it can cause. It's anticipated that by summer, the UK variant will be the predominant variant, and the blessing is that all of the vaccines annihilate the UK variant. The South African one is the one we have to keep an eye on, and it's the reason why we have to stop the spread so that this variant does not become pervasive in our country and put us and this vaccine at risk.
Thank you.
Things that you mentioned, Dr. Yolandra, because it is so powerful. But I want to come back to this virus. Why did it cause such havoc? Well, if you remember from some of the pictures that you've seen on TV, it's this round ball, like a spiky ball that sometimes children play with. Those spikes are the ones that actually get into, the whole virus gets into our system, and those spikes are the ones that begin to do their evil in our bodies. But why is this virus different than the others? That we're exposed to viruses all the time. We get colds, we get the flu, but they've not been this deadly. The flu is deadly, but not anything like this. Not anything that has stopped the whole planet at once. So what was different about this? Well, one of the things is that we as human beings had never seen it before, okay? I'll give you a specific example. When the white man came and colonized the United States, one of the first examples of biological warfare was when they gave smallpox-infected blankets to the Native Americans. And what happened is that wiped out, mass genocide. Why? Because the Native American population had never seen that particular virus. There was no kind of immunity. The same thing with this virus. We have never seen it. We've never been exposed to that particular one. The family of viruses, we see them a lot, but this particular one was new. And it was from 2019. That's why it's called the COVID-19. That's when we first realized that this was this virus. The other thing that's really sneaky about it is that as opposed to other viruses or bacteria that we're exposed to, when there's any kind of foreign agent that's coming into our body, we're like, uh-oh, we know that this is not right, let's start. This one is sneaky. It kind of is like stealth. It gets in. Before we know it, it's infected many organs. We heard about the brain, the heart, the kidneys, the skin, the lungs. It's your whole system that can be impacted, right? And it overwhelms the body. And so in older people, the virus can be overwhelming that their immune system doesn't even have a chance to respond. In younger people, their immune system response can be so overwhelming to this virus that also causes a problem, okay? So one of my friends, Dr. Melissa Clark, came up with an analogy that I really find very helpful, and I'd like to share with you now about what these variants are about, these different South Africa, Brazilian, etc. strains. Well, what she said is that if you're infected with the COVID virus, your body becomes a COVID manufacturing factory. It's turning out a lot of virus. And I don't know, for those of you that are old enough to remember when McDonald's, at the beginning, or Burger King, used to be really good. And then they do the mass production, and then the quality goes down. Well, it's kind of the same with the virus. It starts, when it starts manufacturing more and more virus, there can be defects in the virus. Now, most of the time, that's not an issue. But sometimes these defects make it actually more powerful and more deadly and more infectious. So that's what we're seeing with these. That's why it's so important to get people vaccinated so there'll be less people that are factories, that are COVID-making factories, so that there won't be a chance for these more dangerous and more infectious variants to come out. So I'm going to kind of turn it back to Dr. Hancock and ask her to tell us about the vaccines. How is it that they work? Is there one that's better? You know, we're hearing all kinds of stuff, myths about we're going to be, you know, controlled by it, and or the one that's the Johnson & Johnson is a watered down one. So can you speak to some of those issues?
Elementary school before I became a physician, and there's a statement that we make to our little ones: you get what you get and you don't get upset, right? And so when people ask me, well, what would be your preferred vaccine of choice? It's the one you can sign up for and get in your arm. You know, that's really the bottom line. It's trying to get protected. We have right now in this country three opportunities for vaccination. The Pfizer and the Moderna are based on the same technology, mRNA technology. I always say it's like getting HelloFresh, right? Those meal delivery systems to your house. So you get the recipe and one ingredient, right? You don't get the whole cordon bleu recipe, just the recipe and then the one little ingredient to make the spike protein. So our body cells generate or create this spike protein, which is what the COVID virus uses to enter into the body. But it does not inject into you the entire COVID-19 virus. Once this happens, once the body's able to make a good handful of these spike proteins, the body recognizes it as foreign. Everybody, I always say, it gives the hooty-hoo call. Our system gives the hooty-hoo, you know, hooty-hoo! Everybody else shows up. Antibodies show up. All this good stuff shows up for us to create an immune response. Over 3 to 4 days, the mRNA that is injected into your cell is destroyed, what we in science call denatured. It gets booted out. Inside your cell, you have your cell and all the cytoplasm, the goop that holds all the business, right? But within that cell is your nucleus, a very protected space within the cell that houses and protects your DNA. The mRNA does not enter or penetrate that nucleus as people have claimed it to do. You have to actually physically manipulate the nucleus. I used to do research at Scripps Institute in San Diego when I was in high school and college. I manipulated mouse DNA. You're not going to get a vaccine and it somehow penetrate through the nucleus to then infuse into your DNA, right? This notion of a microchip. I always tell folks, if the government, the big brother wants to track you, you got your phone, your smart TV, your computer, you're in the system, you're in the matrix. Welcome to the matrix, right? So that's not an issue. The third vaccine is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine based on old school technology, the use of DNA, right? That spike protein is still at the core of it, but instead of the body having to get the recipe to make the spike protein, our bodies are exposed to the DNA, not live virus. We haven't done a live virus vaccine since polio back in like the 70s and 80s. We even got rid of that one because we knew that there were some risks, all right? So that's what we have to think about in terms of this vaccine and what it does. There have been a lot of myths out. One of them was that it affects pregnancy, right? That the same spike protein that the body attacks with this virus is the same spike protein that the woman's body uses to attach the placenta to the uterus. Two completely different spike proteins. They just happen to have the same name. In the Pfizer study, there were 23 women who got pregnant during the clinical trial, only one pregnancy loss, and that was in the placebo trial with the saltwater injection. People say, oh, you're going to die from the vaccine much faster than you will die from COVID. Last time I checked, over 530,000 people died because of COVID-19 in this country alone. When you go to a website called VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, it's the system that we as clinicians use to report out side effects and deaths. The government took it a step further. Now you can download an app on your phone called vSafe. You can report it out yourself because some people, and rightfully so, do not trust us to report it out because they feel like we've drank the Kool-Aid and are going to hold back on the numbers, right? So in any case, we are able to report out. When you look at the total number of people who have died in correlation, not causation, to receiving the vaccine, and I say that because it's an important difference. Correlation, the timing in which two events happen, does not equal causation, meaning one happened, therefore this is what caused it, right? Completely different. Just because you brushed your teeth and got into a car accident doesn't mean using Colgate facilitated the car accident. It's correlation, and even when you look at it, you have to look at the data. The majority of people who initially received this vaccine were over 75 years old, and rightfully so. they are also closer to the risk of dying at any time simply based on their age. 900 people thus far have died in correlation in terms of the timing of receiving the vaccine. Now we have had millions upon millions of people receiving the vaccine, far exceeding the number of people now who have acquired COVID-19. If you were to calculate a death ratio, which I do not do because it's inappropriate because the deaths were not caused by the vaccine, but even if you calculated it out, the death rate related to COVID-19 is 1.8%. The death rate, if you would calculate it out, comparing the number of people who've died in correlation to the vaccine in terms of who got it, is 0.0002%. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And remember, I mean, I think the point that you're making, Dr. Hancock, which is so important, probably the most tracked treatment that we ever give are the vaccines. Because vaccines, as you've heard from our pediatricians, are given in children. So that's very, very strict. And I think that it's important for people to know that the government doesn't play with that, because I'm going to ask you, Dr. Lewis-Regland, isn't there a system of actually protection if there is a problem with any of the childhood vaccines, that if a child develops a side effect, or not a side effect, but a complication that is felt to be from the vaccine, there is actually a way for that child to be taken care of?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, our most vulnerable parts of our population are who we, put the most effort and our resources into. One of the reasons so let's talk about the flu vaccine, for instance. One of the reasons that we have vaccines, most people know about childhood vaccines, and then they sort of don't do much during their adult life and into middle age, and then all of a sudden you hit 65 and you got to get your flu shot, right? It's because once you're in that, again, vulnerable, you went from vulnerable, you're very viral, you're virile during your years, and then you hit 65, and no, not saying that to anyone up here, but at 65 we decide, okay, we're back in the population where we need to take care of you. And so these two populations being vulnerable, again, as Dr. Hancock said, the older individuals began to get the vaccine first because we needed to protect them. So these two protected populations that get vaccines, we're extremely careful. We're extremely responsible for any adverse effects. The reporting system is we have to go through so much to do the reporting, and they're stopped, and then we will take care of. We put them in different programs. But the fact is, yes, we are so protective, and it is a system that we've been doing for over 150 years when it comes to vaccinations.
So that's what I wanted to get to, because we know that there are parts of our healthcare system that don't function very well. But one of the ones that functions extremely well is the vaccination system, because people are tracked very, very closely because children get vaccinated. And by the way, being a doctor for adults, everybody should get their flu shot every year. And then we actually now start giving shingles vaccines at age 50. So it's not just for people over, and then people with certain chronic diseases like diabetes, we give them pneumonia vaccines, we actually vaccinate them, and then the tetanus vaccine. Yeah, sickle cell, a lot of diseases. Throughout their lives. Dr. Robinson, you look like you were getting ready to say something. Please join the conversation.
Dr. Hancock mentioned V-Safe program. So if you've had the vaccine, you should sign up for the V-Safe program on the CDC website. You get a text every day, pretty much, asking you if you've had symptoms. And then a couple of weeks later, they'll send you a text. Have you had your second vaccine? So I would say if you've had the vaccine, make sure you sign up for the V-Safe program. Most people don't know it when they go and actually get their vaccine. They may get a handful of papers and go home and throw them away. It may be that information that's on there, but you can go to the CDC website and sign up for that. I wanted to ask how many people up here know 5 to 10 people that have polio. Anyone? How many people up here? Anyone up here on the stage know more than 5 to 10 people with polio? About 5. What about measles, mumps, rubella? Anyone? Why is that? That used to be an issue.
Measles, mumps, or rubella, or have it.
Right. My point is that used to be an issue. Polio. I can't name maybe one person that I know of my 20 years of practice that had polio. And that was because of vaccination. You hear about herd immunity. And when you get to a certain population that have been vaccinated, the virus doesn't have the home to replicate. That's the purpose of it. That's part of the purpose. People want to know, well, if you get this vaccine and I can still get it, what's the purpose of me getting the vaccine? One, because you get less severe disease, right? Less likelihood that you're going to go to the hospital. And two, now the virus doesn't have a house to just lay back and replicate and get stronger and mutate and go on to the next person. So over time, the higher the percentage of vaccination, the lower the rate of COVID vaccine virus spread and the demise of things like polio, measles, mumps, rubella.
We have our Nurse of the Year would like to say something, Ms. Needy.
I just want to also add to what all of my physician colleagues had just shared is that also please don't get disgruntled or swayed with misinformation between the differences of expected adverse events and also expected side effects. And so I think people need to also understand that if you've heard someone say, oh, don't get it because I was so sick. No, you weren't necessarily sick. You had expected side effects. And so when you are taking, and if you have taken the vaccine, it's important to realize that there's a huge difference between an adverse event and expected side effects. You have nausea, vomiting, diarrhea just from taking Tylenol. Read any medication in your at your home, it will say that. And so I think it's also important for individuals to know that if you are getting vaccinated, and hopefully you are, that those are expected outcomes that they knew were going to happen, as Dr. Hancock talked about earlier in her explanation of that. And so during those studies, it's important. And then lastly, I just wanted to add, I had the blessed opportunity to be on a panel about 3 weeks ago with she worked for Pfizer, and she was one of the also Black physicians who actually had been at Pfizer for well over 15, 20 years before we even knew anything about COVID. And she too was working on this type of vaccine issues recently. And so I think it's important, as you alluded to earlier, as we all know about the household name now, Dr. Kizzy Corbett, on the Moderna one, we also had Black physicians at Pfizer who also were leading this initiative. And so again, there were people who looked like us that are vested in us and that wanted to make sure that our health was well. We had the most optimal outcomes as well. But again, just about the vaccine, no, they are expected side effects, and there's a differentiation between adverse events.
Thank you for that. And I just want to say, because at the Rodham Institute, we're part of the Black Coalition Against COVID. I'd like to tell you a little bit about that. The Black Coalition Against COVID was established by Dr. Reed Tuckson, who actually was the former DC Health Commissioner. He sits on the board at Howard, as well as Mr. Ambrose Lane Jr., one of the health activists here in the city. It's now become a national organization. It's comprised of faith-based leaders, leaders in labor, education, people who are in business, all of the fraternities and sororities, all African American, with a singular purpose of educating people about COVID, about the vaccine, so people can make informed decisions. Yes. And actually back in Thanksgiving, we said we sent out a love letter to Black America, and it actually has all of the folks that you've mentioned that have been involved in the research. So that's one thing that I would really urge people to do, blackcoalitionagainstcovid.org.
Blackcoalitionagainstcovid.org.
That's right. A great amount of information there that's updated, because, you know, trust is the bottom line of why people do or don't do things. So I'm going to share a conversation with you that I had with a patient a few weeks ago. He comes in and he's got a lot of medical issues that make him at risk for dying from COVID. He's overweight. It's estimated that 87% of the people who die from COVID are overweight. So I would be at risk, for example. And so I said to him, so are you gonna get the vaccine? He looked at me, kind of went back and put his glasses like this and I said, okay, let me guess why. The computer chip that's gonna be following you. So I said the same thing that Dr. Hancock said. I said, you're already followed. I mean, have you ever, my mom the other day was on the phone talking about Detroit pizza because my brother was into Detroit pizza. And all of a sudden, on her email, Detroit pizza advertisements. She was on the phone. I mean, she wasn't even on the computer. So that's number one, I said. He said, well, it's a conspiracy to kill black people. I said, okay, let's check this out. Who is dying of COVID? We saw with this last administration, I believe that it was a passive genocide because older people, they said, well, if you've lived to 70, no big deal. They talked about, pre-existing conditions. Well, you didn't really die of COVID, you died of diabetes. I have one of my best girlfriends says, that makes about as much sense as if you are in a plane, have diabetes, and the plane crashes, and you say you died of diabetes and not the plane crash. Makes no sense. And then, of course, the third is a third of people dying are of color. So if that's not genocide, I don't know what is. So that was that argument. Who's dying of it? Then he said, well, the DNA, how is it going to affect? So I said the exact answer that Dr. Hancock mentioned. I said, besides, I've had cancer twice. I don't have it in my family. They did the genetic testing. It's the food that we eat, the water that we drink, the air that we breathe. I'm a potato chip lover myself. I like sour cream and onion, barbecue, salt and vinegar, not necessarily in that order. And those are cancer-causing foods. So then I said, and then finally, Mr. So-and-so, I would never, ever recommend something that I didn't do for myself or my family. I got the vaccine, and so did my parents. He said, you know what? Sign me up. And so, the point is, of why it is that it's important to have leadership, all the leaders that you see here with Bishop Staples, clinicians, and all the people that are represented here, researchers, people that are doing work in the pharmaceuticals, all of that, of people that look like you. That's why it's so crucial, because guess what? And Dr. Robinson can probably tell you this, as well as the other fine clinicians on here, when there are more people that look like us, life expectancy for you goes up.
Yes, and that's a great segue, Dr. Gigi. Now we want to hear from the presbyter, because as you said, if your patients know you're getting it, then they'll get it. It's the same with our esteemed panelists here. We're going to defer first to Dr. Browning and come around, because it's the same way in the church. If they know that their pastors are receiving the vaccine, they will too. And so let's begin here with Dr. Browning.
I apologize, I'm going to have to leave early, but I just want to thank Bishop Staples and Temple of Praise, Dr. Gigi. This has been incredible.
Yeah.
And I have to admit that when the pandemic first started, I was not going to get the vaccine. I don't trust the government. And if you don't trust, then you're only looking at the negative, because the positive you feel is slighted anyway. And so Dr. G used the word trust. And I thank God for me today. I'm listening to trusted persons in our community. And I want to give a shout out to my family doctor, Dr. Sharon Arty, and my personal doctor, Dr. Michael Knight, who are trusted. And they are the ones that convinced me I needed to get it. And I can't imagine anyone watching today who, if they were distrustful after hearing these trusted advisors, would not say, I have to get the vaccine. So I just want to say thank you, Bishop.
Bishop Sharon?
I also was a little skeptical about getting the vaccine, not because of what was in the past, but because of the fact that all of the bad press, and all the news outlets, that kind of made me very skeptical of doing it. But then when you get around certain people who you have influence over life, and they say to you, if you get it, I'll get it. And that within itself made me step up to the plate and get my shot. And so I do agree with you, Dr. Gigi, that it will take great leadership to be able to trust what the scientists are saying. Not every news outlet, not the small conversations that you hear from grocery stores or parking lots, But you just have to, as Pastor has alluded to, just trust. And that's what we have to do, is just trust in the Lord with everything that we do.
Pastor Cage.
Bishop Staples, and certainly to the Temple of Praise for bringing this forum together of the clinicians and those of us who are in the faith communities and are leaders. For me, I live my life based on Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all of thine heart, lean not unto thine own understanding. In all of thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. When I first heard about the pandemic, we did a video on Channel 4, and I increased my health, how I ate, how I rested, how I lived, because I knew that I couldn't come out of this pandemic the way I went in. And so every morning for the last year, we met at the church, me and several younger black men, Coach Norris at Duval High School, and we exercised for an hour and a half, did 1,000 push-ups every day. We walked for an hour and a half, because I understand that if we can get it on the front end, take care of it, then we won't have to suffer on the back end. And so many times what happens in our churches, in our community, we always catch it on the back end and never invest on the front end. And a forum like this, we're investing on the front end now, and that'll take care of the back end. But certainly when I went to the Army, Fort Knox in Kentucky, they lined us up, and Bishop and I, we talked about this. Yeah, and they didn't tell us what it was. And we took it and didn't ask no questions. At least in this forum, we can educate ourselves and empower our people. So I'm thankful to God for the vision of you, Bishop Staples, to bring all these great minds together, and so that we can make a positive change in our communities.
Wonderful. Bishop Powell.
Let me also say thank you to Bishop Staples for bringing us together. You know, the Bible says, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. And then Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. I think with the amount of disinformation, misinformation, lies that we've heard over these years have really crippled our people. And so I just want to say to you, Bishop, you really inspired me to go back to my community and to get with my clinicians and doctors and do this on a consistent basis. One of the things that really disturbed me, doctor, was I'm going to be 69 April 1st. So I've got my shot. I got my shot, and like Dr. Robinson said, I get a call just about every day to make sure that I'm fine. But what hurt me was to see at 68 hidden figures. And to know that all this information was out there, I never knew about it. And I'm 68 now, and hearing for the first time that these women are really responsible for these men being in space. And on top of that, it made me mad because I have 3 daughters. Had they known this coming up, it would have inspired them to do greater things. All I'm saying is this has got to be something we do on a consistent basis. And we've got to be like Jesus, who had a doctor with him. Yes. His name was Luke.
Yes.
And we need to make sure we bring these doctors in so that even beyond this pandemic, the heart failures, the strokes, all of the things our people suffer with, we can do a better job with it. So I want to thank all of you for just letting me be a part of this.
Absolutely. Bishop Peoples.
You and your son and your church, you all are setting the pace for everybody, and we appreciate you so much. It was this day last year when we approached our congregation and told them that we were going to take a 1.5 week hiatus. I thank God I wasn't prophesying, because that wouldn't have been come to pass. But I submit to you that had we known that through this season that this would have taken place, a lot of our country would have done different, should have done different. We argued about masks. something that became political. We don't talk about shirts and shoes, no shirt, no shoes, no service, but yet we argued about masks. The truth be made known, that was saving people's lives. We argued about going in seclusion. And now here we are, a year later, arguing about a vaccine. And we have to take note that had the 530,000 individuals that passed away from COVID had the opportunity to make a different decision in our community, whereas if we had closed down for 35 days, 40 days from a community, from a nation, from a world, it would have literally eradicated COVID. There'd be no COVID, there'd be no need for a vaccine. It would have changed our mindset and our paradigm. So here we are a year later, still discussing whether we want to be healthy. When everything we want is right within our grasp, everything we desire is right within our grasp, and we're still having the same discussion. 530 people is the exact amount of folks that live in Wyoming. We lost an entire state in 1 year.
Wow.
So what I submit to those that are struggling with it, I don't want to lose another state. I don't want to lose another family member. I don't want to lose another child. We have within ourselves to make a better decision. And then I just kind of submit to the pastors. One of the things I've noted is the church that comes out of this and the people that come out of this are different than the people that went in this. Our nation is sicker emotionally.
Yes.
The congregants that come to our church are worn out more, frustrated easily, and in some ways we have to be cautious that there wasn't an emotional disengagement with Christ, that some of them are going to feel comfortable sitting in their bed. And so therefore we are challenged to be a bit more aggressive and to be able to reach out to them, because the emotional damage that has taken place during this COVID season has been significant. The church has now been called to be greater than ever, because the people that come back, the communities that come out of this are much sicker than the ones that went in this.
Yes. Yes.
Can I just add something that just underscores what you just shared, Bishop Peoples, and that is the first question when I'm seeing patients that I ask them, have you lost anybody? And that unleashes the hurt and pain. And like we've all said, even Dr. Louis Regline has even written a book about the toll that it's taken on those of us of color who are clinicians, the triple pandemic. But for the past 4+ years of being humiliated by the previous administration, I'm Muslim, I'm African, I'm Arab. I mean, it just felt like a daily onslaught. And what we just witnessed with our Asian brothers and sisters this past week is as a direct result of this hate speech and hate policy. Then you have COVID, which turned our world upside down. Then you had the serial murders televised live. It's not that they weren't happening before, but now because the world stood still, we all had to watch the brutality. And then you have January 6th, which, I was just coming back to work after having, to go through my treatment for the cancer and everything. And I noticed that there were all these license plates from all over the country. And I knew that January 6th was coming up. So I told to my boss, I said, I don't feel comfortable coming into work on Wednesday. He said, why? I said, because they're coming. And he said, okay, if you don't feel comfortable, I just coming back. I said, but what about everybody else? Oh no, work is going to be open. Do you know that at 1 o'clock on Wednesday, they evacuated the building? So that was very personal to those of us that live in the DC area, because we were not listened to. It didn't take a genius to know what was going to happen. The mayor was not listened to. We know how this would have gone down if it was a Black Lives Matters. I mean, Lives Matter. We heard, and they were this close to having a whole bunch of people wiped out, and still and such, that was not enough. So the trauma and the anger and the sadness, and I think probably the biggest part for me, in South Africa, when they say hello, they say, I see you. But when you're not seen, let alone valued, what does that do to your psyche? So the mental health issues are really going up Food, which is the single most important social determinant of mental health. Kids are not eating, and even Dr. Yolanda can tell you about the quality of food is horrible. And so what I've been telling myself and others, because Ms. Meady spoke about training for a marathon, I ran one marathon. At mile 18, which is where I feel we are right now, you hit a wall. You feel like you cannot go on. But what I tell people is we're a lot closer to the finish line than we are at the beginning.
So in that, Dr. Gigi, with what Bishop Peoples said, when we reconvene, people will be much sicker, and even the lingering effects of COVID. So can you all speak to many questions out here? Once we get vaccinated, can we then recontract COVID? Should we still wear masks? How safe should we be? And even when we reconvene in our churches, the leaders, the bishops, should they still keep their people socially distanced? Because some of those will have been vaccinated, but some of them still won't. And we're trying to help them make a decision today by empowering them and educating them to make that informed decision. So can you all speak to that? Can we recontract it?
Sure. I'll just say this. The information that we're giving you today is the best information that we have available based on our scientific experience.
Yes.
This may change.
Fluid, yes.
It's changing. So I'm going to ask, yeah, please, any one of our...
I'll just start really quickly. As a pediatrician working with vaccines all the time, and as our colleague told us, our nurse said, she was vaccinated and then she contracted the disease. So it isn't that you can't get a virus or a disease after being vaccinated. What happens is you'll have less of the effect from that disease, right? We're talking about less hospitalizations, and what we've shown is 100% have not died, right? So we're definitely mitigating death and less disease. Just one quick caveat is, as a pediatrician, one of the things Dr. Robinson was saying is, who knows of anyone who has polio, MMR, rubella, measles. As a pediatrician, one of our biggest challenges when we start working is there are things we don't see anymore, but we're supposed to be able to recognize. And I remember seeing varicella for the very first time in America after chickenpox, right? After the chickenpox vaccine. But so many of us hadn't seen it that we were all debating, was this an actual person with one or two pox? When I was little, you had chickenpox parties. We all got together. My mother, there were four of us, had three older brothers. When one of us got it, she put us all in the house so we could all get it and be done. Wow. So what we all used to see, these parents don't see anymore. And so when we had a kid that had chickenpox with one pox, we had to bring all the residents in the room to show them what it looked like, because we just don't see it anymore. So you can still get chickenpox, even though you get the chickenpox vaccine, you're not gonna have as much of the disease, and you're definitely not gonna see the death. So we want you vaccinated, but we don't wanna walk around thinking you can't get COVID, but you're not gonna get as sick, and you're definitely not gonna die.
Okay, and I think Dr. Robinson has his hand up to speak to it.
That is, if you breathe, you can get any virus.
Okay.
Right? If you breathe, you're breathing in anything that comes into your body. So the vaccine is not some magical shield that coats you from breathing in. So as long as you're in a space where someone is coughing or sneezing or speaking or saying the TH, like the or the, that produces mucus. Okay. And that 6 feet, viruses don't just go 6 feet and drop to the ground. So if you have air floating around, you still can catch it, but the process is not getting it and getting sick from it.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Bishop Peoples had his hand. I think
I just wanted to add to that, because I think the second part of your question is how are we going to govern ourselves once we get back?
Exactly.
On April the 3rd, we're going to open up one of our campuses, one of our campus buildings, and it's going to be a vaccination site, an infusion site, and a testing site. And our objective is they're going to have 900 folks vaccinated a day. Our objective is to open up our church. Those that have been vaccinated will be quickly welcomed in immediately. However, for setting an example's sake, we're still going to have people socially distanced with masks. And the reason is, you might submit, well, why would that be the necessity? Most of the folks here have been vaccinated, but you do it because you want to set the example, not necessarily because you are at as great of a risk because now you've been vaccinated, but because we want to set a community example. So that's our objective as far as how we're going to open up.
Yes.
So Ms. Meady and Dr. Hancock, can you speak to sort of some of the policies or some of the CDC guidelines around getting back to school and work and worship?
Dr. Gigi, and just another reminder, I am not here as a spokesperson for MedStar Health. However, what I will share is that a lot of hospital facilities are now doing surveillance testing on their patients. People also don't realize, we don't want you to be afraid, but there is still community spread of COVID, even from healthcare workers to patients. And we need to also realize, I was just checked yesterday, I think it was Johnson & Johnson and another organization did a study that was posted in the Washington Post, that indicated there's still only 63% of healthcare workers that have been vaccinated. And the majority of those healthcare workers are not just physicians or nurses or technicians. These are also the individuals that work in your dietary, your EVS, which typically are what? Your black and brown individuals that have the lower paid, less required educational positions, right? And so even in facilities, don't think that all of us in the hospitals are vaccinated, because we're not. And we're having the same type of discussion, and they're doing the same exact thing, Dr. Gigi, of having the doctors, having the chief nurse officer, having the chief medical officer, having Dr. Yolanda or Dr. Robinson or the other Dr. Yolanda come and talk to them, intentionally, other black and brown physicians, to go to these other departments to make sure he or she feels comfortable that they can answer the question, because they're not going to go to the CDC website. They're not going to go, to NIH. They're not going to go and read, and I'm not saying that they're not, I'm saying, but the likelihood, we know that's not going to happen. And it is very difficult. I mean, we're nursing and physicians, and it takes a lot to interpret all of that data. And so
speak to each other.
Correct.
I much prefer to speak to somebody than to go on the web and read something.
And it's quicker, it's easier, and again, public health moves as fast as trust. Public health moves as fast as trust. If I don't trust them, I'm not going to do it. When I called Dr. Robinson and he said, take this, do this, I trust him, so I did it. All of my physicians, I wear contacts, my ophthalmologist, my now cardiologist, my OBGYN, my primary care are all black physicians, because I trust them. And Dr. Robinson, and I was using him because he's here, his first thing wasn't take meds. He told me, do your exercise, take off all the sugars, go vegan for 3 days out the week, eat plant-based diets. Because if I want to live, if I don't want to die like my brother did, who died of an aortic aneurysm, if I don't want to have hypertension, as my father, who is a pastor, and you all have lots of stress, has hypertension, if I don't want to die, as my mother died from ovarian uterine cancer, Meady, make this shift. Even though I'm running, but I still eat some of the processed foods, and I cut it out because of Dr. Reginald Robinson telling me to do so, and I don't want to be on amlodipine for the rest of my life. So I'm vested in my own health. But in the hospitals, again, we are doing surveillance testings for patients, sometimes every 5 days. Department of Health sometimes will have to come back and actually test the nurses and the staff, where the doctors and nurses or anyone on a particular unit, they have to get tested every 7 days to make sure that they're not. Most, if not all, hospital acute care settings are testing staff where they have the ability to get tested at least weekly now to make sure that they are okay. So at the end of the day, don't wait till you get COVID. Don't wait till you get a diagnosis of anything else to make sure you are valuing and taking care of your health. Because at the end of the day, the Bible even tells us, beloved, I wish above all things, God says to us that you prosper and are in what? Good health. Because you can't do a single thing. Bishop, nothing matters. Your ministry is nothing if you're not here. The God needs you to physically be here to preach the word to the individuals that are out there so they can do the work that God has called us to do. So if you're not healthy, it doesn't matter. If you're not able to stand and be here and to preach the word of God and to share and pour into us spiritually, it means nothing. And so we have to make sure we're pivoting and understanding that it's not just about, being a size 2 or being a size 22. It's about being healthy, because people are also, Dr. Gigi, skinny fat. Let's be clear. There's plenty of people that are size 2 and 4 that have hypertension and diabetes and high cholesterol. I have a friend who is that, and she's literally a size 4. She's sick. She's skinny fat. And I need people to understand, particularly my black and brown sisters that are watching, it's not a hate. Be healthy and take care of yourself, because you can't do anything. Your children, my son is 14. I want to see my grandchildren. I want to be healthy. I want to be that fly mom when he goes off to college at Morehouse or wherever. And like, is that your mom? That's what I want to be. I want to be healthy and be there. So this isn't a conversation just about COVID. COVID is just ripped off the Band-Aid, right? Our wound has de-hissed, and now it is, oh my God, it's COVID. And we should have learned this back from Katrina, and we didn't. And God is now putting something else yet in front of us, a boulder, not a pebble in the stream, but he had dropped a boulder and said, if you people who are called by my name don't get off your laurels and do the work that I've called you to do, I'm going to keep putting these things in position, putting you in positions that I'm going to make you know that I'm God. And this is not something just about the black folks. And so black people that are watching and brown, get the vaccine. There's no hate. It's no shame. If you're not cool, if you're not clear, ask your doctor. Get the information, as Bishop Browning said, and then make an informed decision for yourself. Sorry, I went off on that tangent.
Dr. Hancock.
In terms of the specific CDC guidelines, I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is how confusing this past year has been. When you politicize a pandemic, it makes it very difficult for you to trust a government designed to protect you. I talked just last week with the Urban League, where I posted Dr. Jerome Adams' tweets. He said, roses are red, violets are blue, coronavirus is less dangerous than the flu. Well, if the Surgeon General is saying this, then that's what I'm going to believe, and that's what I'm going to base my decisions on. And it clearly was not the case, right? In my conversations about how I came to make the decision about getting the vaccine, I had to wait until I could trust the administration to report out appropriate and accurate and transparent data. It has been confusing, but that is also science, right? Science is not exact. As we learn more and we learn better, we do better, right? And in terms of the guidelines, the CDC said don't wear a mask, and they said use your t-shirt as a mask. Now they say in double mask. So people have reason to sort of scratch their heads. It's all that we have to do is to continue to analyze the data. As we know now, the CDC has recommended that people who have been vaccinated can be amongst each other, right? People who have been vaccinated can be around people who are at low risk for COVID. That recommendation did make me scratch my head, because COVID-19 is a roll of the dice. You could be perfectly healthy with no health conditions and end up with hypertension. So I still mask up. The CDC said if you are exposed to COVID, you don't have to quarantine or get tested if you've been vaccinated. I don't necessarily agree. I think that you should still get tested to make sure that you know what your status is and what risk you pose to yourself and to your loved ones. What we do know about this vaccine is that, as we've heard before, it decreases the severity of symptoms, it decreases the risk of death. We are just now learning. A study was just released out of the Mayo Clinic just this week, looking at people who were vaccinated and what their risk was of asymptomatic disease, meaning I was exposed and then I tested positive, but I had no symptoms. They were able to determine that 80% of people who were vaccinated and exposed did not go on to develop a positive test for COVID. That's good news. It means that 80% likelihood of decreased risk of becoming infected once exposed. But guess what? There's still a 20% risk of being exposed, developing the infection, and then sitting next to your 90-year-old Nana and causing her to have the cootie, especially in the face of these variants. So even with the government recommendations, God also granted us the gift of common sense. Yes. And so that's what I say to use as we proceed forward. I will still be masking up. I will still be testing when I know that I'm getting exposed, because I'm a physician, and this is the work that I do. And whenever it's time for me to show that Black Lives Matter and I go out to protest, I will be getting myself tested. We just have to operate in wisdom and the common sense that God blessed us with.
It's about love.
Yes, yes.
One's family. You know, I always say, I am not from the African diaspora. I am of Egyptian heritage. I do not have that awful experience. But that's one of the things that unfortunately has been stripped and eroded from you as the children of the diaspora, is that, you know, the dignity and the love of self and the self-esteem has been eroded. And that's why being in a faith-based place of worship with all of the leaders here is, because Bishop Peoples and I were talking about this before, it is about reclaiming that pride and that self-love and love of community. We're not just doing it for ourselves. It's because we love ourselves, our families, our communities. This is an act of love.
And Dr. Gigi, could you speak to the efficacy of the various vaccinations,
Thank
please?
you, yes. So the 3 vaccines, there's the 2-shot ones, Pfizer and Moderna, and the 1-shot one with this Johnson & Johnson. I think most people would prefer to get the 1-shot just because it's more convenient. And the efficacy, the Johnson & Johnson, as compared to the Moderna and the Pfizer, there's a lot of confusion about this, but this is what I say to people. The bottom line is that the Johnson & Johnson is effective in the way that counts, reduces death and disability and hospitalization. So as Dr. Hancock started off, whichever vaccine you can get is the one that you should get.
Okay.
And I just want to share one more thing. I too was reluctant to get the vaccine. Actually, I remember thinking to myself, it's a good thing that England is starting off, because if there's a problem, then I can think about it. So I don't want to just get people to say, oh, because you're a doctor or a nurse or whomever, that it's something automatic. We're human beings, and we also understand the legacies of this system. And so that's why it's crucial that you use your common sense, talk to people that you trust, not just in the medical, clinical world, but your leadership, your pastors, your bishops, your reverends.
Absolutely. So our endeavor has been to educate and empower. And so as we're coming more to a close, we're going to start on this end and give everyone the opportunity to make last comments. But any last questions for the physicians? I see your hand, Bishop Powell.
I just wanted to really ask Dr. Gigi, I have received so much misinformation, especially with black men, regarding the Tuskegee issue. And people have it really backwards to the extent that they're telling people they gave them the vaccine and that's why they died. But the truth of the matter is they didn't give it to them. So could you really just address that?
Sure. There are some people within the clinical community of black physicians and black nurses that are saying, we got to move past Tuskegee. But I say we have to address these issues to the level of comfort to the individual, to the family, or the community that's sitting with us. So Tuskegee, and why people keep referring back to it, and Henrietta Lacks, is because there was a treatment that was available for these people who had syphilis, and they were not offered it. So they had all the complications. They became demented. Some of them had heart disease, all of those. So there is precedent. We know this to happen. And as I said, not just in the past, but in the right now, okay? The misinformation is something that will always be there. And as I'm going to refer to my friend, Dr. Melissa Clark, because when you are marginalized as a people, you get your information from what are non-traditional sources, because you don't trust the sources. So now, of course, social media is one of the places that people go to. But unfortunately, there's all kinds of other agendas within social media, whether there is to promote, disharmony, whether it's to promote, money. I mean, there's so many other things. And there are deliberate campaigns that target black men. I mean, we know that black men, the numbers of the school to prison pipeline, that's always been in the sights of this system. So it is about educating people about some of the myths that are out there, and ultimately you can't force people to do anything. They have to come to it. But I will tell you this, when a mother or father, a matriarch or patriarch, makes the decision, a lot of people follow. So that's why when you get vaccinated as leaders in the church, a lot of people follow. And I think that the stories that we're sharing today, but also for the people that are reluctant to have those conversations and not just say, no, it's not true, but also to affirm and validate what their concerns are, because that's real. There are kernels of truth that are there. And that's what actually makes them so easy to spread, because there is kernels of truth surrounded by misinformation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, any other questions? And if there aren't, then we're going to start with Bishop Charity, and we're going to end with our very own Bishop Staples. He's going to close us out. Bishop Charity, your last comments, and come on around.
Yes, I want to, first of all, thank again my pastor, my bishop, for allowing me to be here in short, and for these great minds that on this platform. I've learned so much. I'm being honest, I've learned so much. I also want to say to those on the virtual platform, what you have heard on today, you should have no doubt in your mind to make your way to get this vaccine. If you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for the loved ones that you surround yourself with. We have to defeat this virus as quickly as possible. So you've heard it from the experts. So do what you have to do your part, and let's get back to what some people call normalcy. Thank you so much, Bishop.
Bishop, as a man of God, thank you so much for opening up your home, your virtual space as well, for allowing us to be here and to share, because as you alluded to earlier, the Bible does say where people lack knowledge, they shall perish. I just have 3 quick things to share. The first one I didn't allude to earlier. If you do get COVID, there is also a personal financial impact that you all have to that. I was quarantined in a hotel room for 10 days. You had to pay for that. I'm blessed that my organization was able to pay for that. I don't live in a mansion. Lord knows I don't. So I didn't have another separate basement to go to. That's something else to think about. A lot of Black and brown individuals have multi-generational homes, and that may not be the case. I had to rely on family and friends to deliver breakfast, lunch, and dinner because the hotel did not do anything if you unfortunately do get COVID and you have to quarantine. That clearly, I calculated, was over $2,000 that I would have had to pay for out of my pocket had I not had family and friends, and my organization did not cover the hotel stay. The second thing is, where there is miscommunication, it leads to misinformation. And when you have that misinformation, it completely can totally impact your life in a very negative way. Lastly, I will always say that as long as I am able to breathe, find a healthcare professional that you trust, that has a vested interest in you, that is not just pushing medications and saying, okay. Make sure he or she is able and willing to sit down and explain to you exactly what is happening, because that is also so important. And in closing, Black lives do matter. And at this point, we have to make sure that we value our own life. It's not just a slogan. My life matters. And I want to make sure that I'm here for another 20, 30, yay, 40 years to be present and to be able to still share my story. Thank you for allowing me to be here, Bishop. I appreciate you, Dr. Gigi. You know I love you. And everyone, just get vaccinated if you can. If you have any questions, check with your physician about it.
I would just want to reiterate the gratitude to Bishop Staples and to this wonderful house of worship, to my good friend, colleague, and Shiro, Dr. Gigi, for inviting me into this space. 2 things I would say. The first is, vet it before you spread it. Pay attention to where you're getting your information, right? So when we go to church, when we look for a spiritual leader, we pay attention to the word that's being delivered, how it's being delivered, what word are they speaking from, what perspective are they providing before we commit to membership. It should be no different when you make decisions about your health. Identify those trusted sources, not Uncle Ray Ray who saw it on YouTube and it speaks to what you believe, right? Just because we believe it and are compelled by our faith to follow it does not always necessarily mean that it is the right path for us. Asking the question is okay. I always tell my students, I teach at the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University, say the only stupid question is the one that doesn't get asked. So if you read it and it sort of speaks to you, but you're not sure, ask the question and identify those individuals that you can trust. The second, as a parent, as a pediatrician, I would implore all of us who are connected to children to check in on our children. We have all these grown-up conversations, but very rarely do we talk to our children about how they've experienced this pandemic. especially as we come close to bringing our little ones back to school. There are children who will be anxious. There will be children who will be depressed because now they have to leave home and go to school. There are children who were anxious and depressed because they're at home and they're eagerly anticipating going back to school. And in any case, it's important for us as the adults to check the temperature of our children to make sure that emotionally they are whole as we all navigate through this pandemic.
Was for this opportunity to empower our community and to really bring forth that which has always been a part of the black community. We've been a holistic community. We've not been a fragmented community where the church is by itself, the medical professions are by themselves, the educators are by themselves. But we empowered our communities because we came together across disciplines for the betterment of the total community. And I believe that even before this pandemic, COVID-19, we were having a pandemic in the black community already. When you talk about the murder rate in Chicago, Illinois, right here in Washington, D.C., in Baltimore, Maryland, we were killing one another at an alarming rate. And so I think even in the midst of this, in the midst of the vaccine, our community needs healing. And we need to heal from every corner and crevices of our community. And health and wellness is important. But look at the drug epidemic. Heroin is on the rise. Coming over here, just had a young man, he was kidnapped. When they went into his house, they beat a 4-year-old almost to death. The 4-year-old is in the hospital on life support, fighting for her life. They found the father, I guess yesterday or this morning, in a creek. This is the mentality in our own community. And so when we begin to love each other like we should, I think that we'll make a difference and the trust will be there. But you can't trust excluding the black church.
Thank you all for having me. And I'm blessed to be a graduate of 2 HBCUs, Morehouse undergrad and Howard for medical school. And something that's taught is your life and your career is bigger than you. Right, Dr. LaSalle Fall, a great surgeon at Howard, the late Dr. LaSalle Fall would say 3 sayings to all of us. Primum non nocere, first, do no harm. 2, res ipsa laquida, the thing speaks for itself. There are 500,000 deaths. So when patients ask me about the vaccine, say, well, there's a lot of things that are out there that are unknown, but what I do know is that 500,000 people are dead from coronavirus. And then you should be able to say, mea culpa, or my fault. When you give people the information that wasn't true or that you didn't think were true, to be able to say that. And I'll add one at the end, be able to say, I don't know. Right. Yeah. Because there are many things that we don't know. And our folks are straight shooters. If you come to them and say, you're talking out the side of your neck and you're trying to quote what Sanjay Gupta might be saying or someone on TV is trying to say, they may not listen to you. Be able to say, I don't know. But I'll go research that for you and be able to be that person to go back and regain that trust.
Bishop, thank you again for your leadership. And for really, as I said before, bringing out these hidden figures. I think these doctors are so critical to the life. You know, when Jesus talked about the abundant life, these doctors are so critical to that. And I think the more we can bring these doctors in our local communities to the forefront and let them really speak truth to our people, the trust that was talked about over here, I think will become more realized. And I think this is something that has to continue, if it's on a monthly basis, whatever it might be. We got to continue this kind of conversation so that our people will at least know the truth, because that's the thing that we're fighting against, is the misinformation, the disinformation, and the lies that are being spread over social media and so many different other areas. But thank God for the Temple of Praise, which is a place of truth. And thank God for the truth.
To echo everyone, thank you so much, Bishop Staples. I want to thank also Prophetess Deborah. You have also been vital to the community, to getting information out, to being effective, and to looking for people like us to connect. And so I don't want you to, I know that everyone thanks you quietly. I just wanted to make sure that you knew how much we appreciate you. Obviously, Dr. Gigi is well loved and well respected, and thank you for inviting me into this space. One of the things I would say to individuals, everyone, is that we have been able to be in a space and be called frontline heroes, right? There were, every night, I think at 7 p.m. or so in New York, people were being applauded, the nurses and the doctors for coming home, because it definitely has been difficult. It's been tough, it's been challenging. But we're all frontline workers, we're all essential. You all as parents, you all as community leaders, workers, the grocery store attendants, those who have gone out of their way to help a neighbor, knowing that they were really risking themselves, right? We've all been essential. And so we have to recognize that so many people have not been recognized as essential, and that has definitely affected them. The mental health piece, the physical health piece, all of us, we just have to make sure that we're aware. One of the things that we were discussing that Bishop People said is that we're not going to be the same coming out of this. We're going to be a little sicker. We're going to be a little bit more depressed. And I hate to tell y'all, but most of you probably know, you might be a little heavier. And so I want to make sure I address that, because as we talked about it, obesity itself, for many people, it tripled the risk factors, right, for COVID, for being hospitalized, for even dying. Obviously, it's a double-edged sword because we were quarantined and sitting at home and comfort eating, and not comfort eating on salad, most of us. We weren't comfort eating on those foods that were probably great for us. Mostly those foods might have been processed, might have been high in sugar, might have been high in salt. So it was increasing our hypertension. It was increasing the need for insulin. It was increasing our weight. So I just want us to be aware of the place that we're in, not in a place of shame, but now a place of understanding and recognition. And so that we're more diligent now, and that we come back stronger, and that we come back working together, and we come back understanding that each one of us has been affected and impacted, and we're all essential, and that we're gonna need each other to get back. It's not gonna be normal, and prayerfully, we just come back better. As Biden is saying, build back better. Hopefully we now come back better, because we understand that we all need each other more than we ever did know before. All of this isolation, all of these silos that we've been in, it wasn't until we had to connect with one another. This connection between health and wellness and ministry has always been there. As he said, Jesus walked with Luke. We've always known it, but we haven't practiced it effectively. And prayerfully, we will do that now. And so I just thank you again for having us here and for allowing us to be in this space to work with you all.
Bishop, I love you, sir. I love you tremendously, and this has been dynamic. This is amongst one of the greatest panels I've ever been a part of, and I've gotten much smarter hanging around these folks, without a doubt. It is just my truth. I'll also submit to you that, I agree, it seems like the refrigerator became my nightstand. I'm trying to pray through that for a lot of folks. Somebody right now is watching this, and they're struggling. The last year has been a roller coaster for them. They've gone through anxiety and fear. They've gone through hurt. They've seen people who they love pass away. They've seen a political upheaval that has never been seen before in our nation's history, and they're struggling. And for those folks, all I want to simply say to you is that while this has been a tough year, you were tough enough to make it. And while you've hurt this year, there's a grace on you that has allowed you to be more creative than you've ever been before. And you're going to come out of this. And while you're hurt and while there's been some brokenness, the story of this is that I was tested, but I can testify because now I have a testimony. You are better today because you overcame this. So if no one else has done this, congratulations. You're already shown to be a more than conqueror. That's my only word.
I don't even know where to start, but I will tell you that being here at Temple Praise is very special to me. I'm Muslim, but I believe that all places of worship are special. I've attended your services. I want to come back to your Easter service and Christmas service when you have it again for everybody, because it really moves my spirit. And I want to tell you that Pastor Webb, we're twins actually. It turns out that we were born on the same day. So she is my chosen sister. She is my friend. She's my partner. We've done a lot of work since the COVID pandemic began in educating people. And I just think it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you and to serve, because we're all spokes on a wheel. We are all spokes on, I mean, I love pyramids, but there's no place for them when we're talking about each other. We are all equally important. Nobody's more important. We are all here as servant leaders. So thank you for inviting us. We love you.
I want to thank each one of you for coming and being a part of this discussion in this panel. Our church, within the last 7 or 8 months, have had a funeral every day. We have been burying members of other churches and members in the community, and we're getting to the place now where they're having 2 a day because people are dying. I think it's important that not only do we come together like this, and I think I'm going to challenge some of the pastors, because on Sunday morning sometimes, when things like this happen, we need to invite some of the doctors or to come and to speak to our people. You know, they know that, you know, we preach and we preach the Bible, but sometimes in certain circumstances, they need to hear somebody else explain some things to them and answer some questions. So that's important as well, and we're going to continue to do these types of panels, and I've always been interested in inviting different people to come and to speak that somehow or another will enlighten our congregation. So I'm so thankful that you're here in this area here, Southeast Ward 8. I remember when I first came and started pastoring in this area, I was surprised when I came in the 90s, early 90s, that there wasn't a Blockbusters in Ward 8. The business level was so far down, there wasn't hardly any stores, anything of that nature. They built a grocery store on Alabama Avenue over here, but in Ward 8 there was nothing, nothing. And that's another area that we're going to challenge. We're going to talk to bankers. We're going to see why, you know, what bank, red lines, things of that nature, people that want to go into business, entrepreneurship, because there are people in banks that will give certain people all the money they need from an idea or a business plan. I remember when I was, just got out of high school, I was in the Army, and I came home and I ran into a guy that I went to school with, a white guy. He pulled up, he had a red Corvette. And I asked him, I said, what are you doing? You know, he said, well, he had opened up a store where he was leasing and renting hospital equipment. And I asked him about that. He said, well, what I had was a business plan. And I went to the bank and they gave me so much money to open up a business. Now that happens to other folks, but that don't happen to us. Now we're in a position now, I think, that we ought to bring some people on the carpet and find out what's going on. There should be a lot of funds available. I don't even think you all may know this more than I do, doctor's offices weren't here. If you got sick in Ward 8, if your child got a cold, sniffles or whatever, the flu, you had to go to the emergency room. Those are things, yeah. Those are things that need to change in this area, in other areas like this, you know. So we have to become more involved in what the people that we pastor are concerned with. You know, and that's important. I want to thank Prophet as well for helping me with this as well. And we look forward to seeing you again, other situations, and maybe we can come back after a few months and discuss the progress or discuss some things that we can do. Yes. And I think we can do some things together. God bless you. Yes. God bless you.
Well, thanks everyone. We pray that we have enlightened you, we've empowered you, we've encouraged you. And now for those that's at the crossroads of decision, we want you to make that decision. You've heard from the experts. You've heard from your pastors, the bishops, the leaders. Sign up for the vaccine. Stay tuned for more information on the Temple of Praise website, on the Temple of Praise Facebook page, and even at the Rodham Institute, upcoming the next few weeks, we're partnering with the Tennis and Learning Center. With Mrs. Cora Masters-Barry, we're having a citywide vaccination event. You'll even be able to sign up there. So go there and sign up, get vaccinated, stay safe. We love you and thank you for tuning in. God bless you until we meet again.